Well, welcome to the Royal Society of Edinburgh and to tonight's event on Being a Woman in Science, Change Times, which we're running as part of Edinburgh Science Festival. I'm sure some of you will already have been to events in the festival or will be going to ones coming up. My name is Rebekah Widdowfield and I'm the Chief Executive here at the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and I have the privilege of chairing tonight's event with some leading scientists who will be well known to you: Dame Professor Anne Glover, Dame Professor Jocelyn Burnell, and Dr. Silvia Paracchini from the University of St Andrews. Maybe I could just ask how many of you know about RSE and have heard of us? Oh, a good few hands. I'm very impressed. I'm going to tell you about us anyway, just to make sure you really do know and you're not just pretending. But for those of you who maybe are less familiar with RSE or less familiar with our work, we were established in 1783 for the advancement of learning and useful knowledge, and that remains our mission to this day. We express it in a slightly different way in terms of making knowledge useful and knowledge made useful, but our mission is the same. And we deliver on that mission in a number of ways. We seek to inspire young talent through a programme of research grants and awards. We provide expertise to policymakers on a whole range of issues. We build research collaborations overseas through relationships with sister academies. And also we do stuff like this. We engage with the public and with wider audiences on key matters of interest to Scottish society. And I think the level of interest in this event and the amount of work that's going on about women in STEM really shows that this is an issue that remains very pertinent and very live. You do know there's no such thing as a free lunch and there's no such thing as a free event, so we are going to ask you to do a little bit of homework as part of today's event and help take part in this event through a tool you might have used before called Mentimeter. So those of you with mobile phones, if you go onto the website up there, menti.com, and use that code that's up there, it'll allow you to participate by answering just 3 questions that we've got for you, and then we'll see some of the answers come up on the screen. If you're struggling with your own connection, the RSE's Wi-Fi is RSE Guest, and the password is RSE 826826. Don't ask me where those numbers came from. So just as a little bit of a test of how good we are at using the technology and to get you used to using it, I've given you the name of 3 leading scientists sitting beside me on this panel, but would love to know from you, if you can name up to 5 female scientists, who would they be? So once you're on the site and you put that number in, you'll be able to name some female scientists. Part of the reason for asking that question is if you put into the internet, if you put into Google leading scientists or leading scientists, what you'll often get is a long list, and you'll have to go often quite a way down before you get to any women. I looked at a number of lists, and the proportion of women range from 10% to 30%, but not much more than that. If you look at the list of Nobel Prize winners, fewer than 8% of people who've won the Nobel Prize winners are women. Of the 590 awards that have been made. So actually we want to have a sense of, well, how well do people know about women scientists, and how well do you know about women scientists? So you'll start to see coming up on the screen the names that you're putting in. The bigger the name means the more people are saying it. We have some of them in the audience tonight, but I think they might be putting their own names in. Fantastic. So you can, if you've not had a chance to do it yet, you can continue to participate throughout the evening in that question, and indeed the other 2 that we'll show you the answers to as we go through. I think one thing for me, though, again, if you look on the internet, you'll get Marie Curie, you'll get Rosalind Franklin, you'll get, a small number of names that come up consistently, but then beyond that, you actually get many fewer names. And if you look in Wikipedia, you get many fewer names of leading women scientists. So just in terms of the format of tonight, I'm going to kick off by telling you a little bit about a recent report that RSE did along with the Young Academy of Scotland on tapping all our talents. We'll then have the opportunity to hear from Jocelyn, Anne and Sylvia, who will each provide some opening remarks about what attracted them to a career in science and when they realised they were not only a scientist, but a female scientist. We'll then have a conversation amongst the 4 of us for probably about half an hour before we open up the event to a wider discussion. I'm going to introduce the panelists just before they speak. But for now, let me start by giving you an overview of RSE's recent report on women in STEM. before I do that, I do have to tell you the usual stuff about fire alarms. There isn't any fire alarm planned. If an alarm does go off, the best exit for most of you will be back through the main door which you came through the entrance lobby, and turn right, and we assemble outside the dome, which is the building, if you don't know, with the big columns. Anne usually says, just follow her, because she'll be the first out that door. So that would be another way, but basically it's out that door. So in terms of tapping all our talents, RSE has had a long-standing interest in women in STEM. And in 2012, instigated actually very much by Anne as Chief Scientific Advisor in the Scottish Government at the time, and Jocelyn as President of the RSE, RSE undertook a report called Tapping All Our Talents, which was looking at women in STEM. And in November last year, we published Tapping All Our Talents 2018. We thought that was the best title to keep the consistency, which was chaired by Leslie Yellowlees, who's in the audience tonight. And that was a progress report on women in STEM. And we wanted to see, well, what progress had been made since the earlier report in 2012, which had highlighted that almost 3/4 of females in STEM, almost 3/4 of female STEM graduates left the profession. So a much higher proportion than men leaving the profession. And that within academia, the most senior roles were occupied by men. And the more senior you got, the more women dropped out of the system. So that was called the leaky pipeline. And we wanted to know, well, is the leaky pipeline still leaking, and what other progress has been made? And what we found from the update report is there has been some good progress made. There's many more women in STEM and industry, still the minority, but many more. And there's more women remaining within the STEM profession, but again, still fewer than men. But then we found other things that were less positive. So there's been very little improvement, for example, in participation at college and university by women in STEM subjects. And in terms of the pipeline, yep, it's still leaking. Maybe not as badly, but we're still some way before we have gender equality and before we're truly tapping into all the talents of all our population. Now, we see that report very much as the start of a process, not the end of it, and as a springboard to further action. And one of the things that we were struck by is that just the importance of positive role models. And that led us to think about, well, what about the visibility of women scientists? And we had some fantastic names listed there, but what about the names that weren't on that Mentimeter? And so that was the instigation for the exhibition that I hope you've seen on your way in, or will have the opportunity to see on your way out, or indeed come back during the working hours, and the exhibition will be on till the autumn, and you'll be able to come into the building and spend some time looking at it. But we wanted to be able to celebrate women working in science in Scotland and convey that science is a career that is open to anyone from any background, and also the diverse roles and things you can do with science. I think in school we often talk about doing biology or chemistry or mathematics or physics. But actually, what do those subjects lead to? What can you do with those subjects? And you get a real sense from the exhibition of all the different things you can do. So people who are helping prevent disease, who are improving the environment, who are generating new forms of energy, all the different things you can do with science. But the other thing that came through to me really strongly, and I think really nicely, was just the love of people who are working in science in terms of the love of their jobs, what they liked in terms of learning new things, working with different people, making a difference to the world. And I hope you'll see some of that in the exhibition. If you're sitting around thinking, that person looks vaguely familiar to me, it might be that you've already seen them in a photograph, because I'm delighted that we've got a number of women who are in the exhibition here with us tonight. And I'm just going to ask them to stand up when I say their name so you can see who they are, and maybe try and collar them before the end of the evening if there's anything particularly you want to ask them. So starting with Professor Polly Arnold. She's in the overflow. Polly, I hope you're standing up because I'll be checking later. Professor Sharon Ashbrook. Professor Inika de Mortal. Professor Dame Anna Dominicek. Hi. Hiding, okay. Professor Karen Folds. This is going well. Professor Eva Heavier. Professor Rona McKee. Right at the back there, Rona. Professor Mandy McLean, who's also one of our trustees at RSE. Professor Mercedes Moroto Valla. Not here tonight. Dr. Deborah O'Neill. Right. And Professor Leslie Yellowlees, who I've already named and shamed, but has to stand up anyway. But you can learn much more about the women I've mentioned tonight and others who are in the exhibition outside. And there is a little exhibition booklet as well that we're just having reprinted. So as I say, please do come back in and see that. So returning to tapping all our talents, if you read the report, and it's available online, there's a huge number of facts and figures about how women's life in science has changed over the years. But what we wanted to do tonight was give more of a personal insights into actually how the experience of being a woman in science has changed through the personal stories of three eminent leading scientists, Anne Glover, Jocelyn Burnell, and Silvia Paracchini. I am only going to give potted histories of their backgrounds. I could spend probably a good hour just listing the awards of Jocelyn and Anne alone, so I'll spare the time to have the conversation. But I'm going to introduce them each in turn, and they're going to speak for 3 or 4, 5 minutes or so just about what led them into science and being a woman scientist. But if I can maybe kick off with Anne. Anne is a molecular biologist by background. She's had a string of roles both in academia, business, and in public policy, including being the first Chief Scientific Advisor for the Scottish Government and being the first and so far the only Chief Scientific Advisor for the European Commission, but quite an accolade. She worked for a good number of years at the University of Aberdeen and is currently a member of the Principal's Senior Advisory Team at the University of Strathclyde and the current president of the RSE, i.e. my boss. So go gently on me.
Thanks, Rebekah. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming. So, how do you get interested in science? Well, I think what I'll say will be very familiar to many of you who are scientists, but when I was young, I was insatiably curious. And actually, I think most young people are insatiably curious. You're interested in the why, what, where, when, how. And that curiosity never left me. So at school, I was always gravitating towards the science classes, actually because I genuinely found them much more fun because you got to do experiments. So there was a kind of practical side of it. It wasn't just the thinking, which is enjoyable, but also the practice of doing stuff and finding out things. And this probably says something deep and significant about my personality, but I just loved the idea that I was discovering something. So science always seemed like a bit of an adventure. And so many people adventure by trekking off to the North or South Pole or whatever. But I think scientists also are on an adventure to discover new knowledge. So it was very easy from that background. And I'd have to say also I was very warmly supported by my parents, neither of whom were scientists at all, but who really fed my curiosity, who perhaps were sometimes a bit bemused and puzzled by what I wanted to do, but whatever I wanted to do, they let me. So the house was always full of frog spawn, and my father even kind of got me a makeshift telescope to have a look at the night sky. So you can see I wasn't narrow in my interests. I was very broad in my interests. And I went to university and studied biochemistry, and the chemistry bit came from I had a brother who was 5 years older than me. And to be honest, he wasn't really interested in science. And my parents, for whatever reason, bought him a chemistry set for one of his birthdays. And he started to assemble this in our kitchen, our family kitchen. And I don't know if anybody of you recognize this, but he didn't read the instructions. And so what resulted, because in those days, this would have been in the 60s, chemistry sets were a lot more exciting than the ones you can buy now. And so there was he did actually manage to do a massive explosion, which brought down the roof in the corner of the kitchen. And yeah, my parents were quite upset about that. I just thought, whatever that is, that's what I want to do, because that seemed unbelievable, a box of something inert that could be converted into this fabulous explosion. It seemed unbelievable to me. So natural progression, went to university, heard lots of messages which were odd, but I suppose I ignored them, like chemistry isn't for women because it's very smelly and you wouldn't like the laboratory environment. And I just thought it's kind of puzzling coming from someone who was a chemist. He wasn't really selling it very well. And I think what was being said was it's not suitable for a woman to do that. And there were a lot of messages like that, some subliminal, some very forthright. But you're quite resilient, I think, when you're young, and I just carried on doing what I wanted to do anyway. And then, Rebekah, you were kind of focusing on when did you first realise that you were a woman in science? And I suppose I didn't realise until it was pointed out to me, until other people, when you start doing postdocs, and then I was lucky. I was able to continue in research. It was what I wanted to do. I became a lecturer, and then you go through the kind of promotion thing. And the thing that I noticed was not noticing that I was being disadvantaged in any way because I was a woman, until I started getting vaguely senior. And then I really started noticing. And I don't know whether it was because my colleagues felt then, okay, she's becoming a threat to me, or, I'm going to have to compete with her in order to, if we're both going for similar positions, or compete for funding, or whatever it was. But that's when I started noticing it. And I wish I'd noticed it earlier. And maybe we'll come back to that. But the bottom line is why science for me has been a lifelong career, and I'm still enjoying it, is because it's so stimulating. It's unbelievable that you can be involved in generating new knowledge and being part of that kind of huge voyage of discovery. And for me, it is unbeatable. And the people that you meet, the best, most creative people in the world. And I don't think there's anything you could say that would that could be more powerful than that about a career in science, engineering, technology, maths.
Great, thank you very much. And talking of new discoveries, Jocelyn Burnell is an astrophysicist who, as a postgraduate student, discovered the first radio pulsars in 1967, which have been widely recognised, I think, as one of the most important scientific achievements of the 20th century. Like Anne, Jocelyn had a varied career working in a range of different universities, including Southampton and UCL, and at the Open University, but also worked for a good number of years at the Royal Observatory here in Edinburgh. Jocelyn is currently visiting Professor of Astrophysics at the University of Oxford, and was the first female president of the RSE, serving here from 2014 to 2018. So my ex-boss. Jocelyn, over to you.
Thank you. My story is rather different from Anne's, partly because I'm probably a decade older than Anne. I started life in Northern Ireland. My parents considered science important. My father was an architect. They promised me that when I went to secondary school, I'd get the chance to do science. So when in the first week of secondary school, without discussion or choice, the boys were sent to the science lab and the girls were sent to the cookery room. And I tried protesting to the domestic science teacher, but she wasn't having anything of it. My parents hit the roof when I told them that evening and phoned the head teacher, as did the local GP who had a daughter in my class, as did one other set of parents. And when the science class next met, there were 3 girls and all the boys. And the teacher made us 3 girls sit right up against his desk. I don't think he'd ever taught girls. Clearly we were dynamite. We did physics that first term and I loved it. And I came top of the class. And I'd love to think the school learnt a lesson from that, but it takes time to learn lessons. We did chemistry the next term. That was okay. I wasn't quite as good at that as I was at physics. In the 3rd term, we did what they called biology. They gave us flowers to draw, label the parts and learn the names. And I thought, boring. And I've had a bit of a prejudice against biology ever since. I had part of my secondary education at a girls' boarding school. Girls' boarding schools had trouble getting good teachers, but we had a very good physics teacher who was well retired but was a good teacher, and he was encouraging. And I ended up going to Glasgow University to do a physics degree. Ended up in the honours class, 49 men and me. I had decided before I left school that I wanted to do radio astronomy, so the physics degree was a step on that road. And more by accident than by design, I ended up in Cambridge University doing a PhD in radio astronomy. Apart from that physics teacher at my boarding school and my parents, I have not had encouragement, to be absolutely honest. I lived in a women's hall of residence in Glasgow and regularly faced questions from the other women like, how can you bear to do physics? You need a good friend who says, nobody asked you. But actually, in one sense, you are challenging their choices. You know, did they too rapidly dismiss science, dismiss physics? So you are challenging by doing something unusual. And I didn't have any role models, which probably doesn't surprise you after all I've said.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. And our final speaker on the panellist is Dr. Silvia Paracchini, who's a neuroscientist working in the field of human genetics and has quite possibly the scariest photograph in the exhibition. If you've not seen it, it terrifies me. I'm glad to say that she hasn't got the syringe or a piece of equipment with her. Well, I hope she hasn't got it with her in case I ask her a question she doesn't like. But Silvia Paracchini is a neuroscientist working in the field of human genetics, and her research is aimed at understanding how DNA variations can help us understand diseases like dyslexia. Sylvia worked for 9 years at the University of Oxford before moving to St Andrews University in 2011, where she holds a Royal Society University Research Fellowship. And we haven't specified the name, we haven't actually set out the ages of the different panellists, but we have tried to get a bit of a range of age in terms of how that experience might have changed over the years. But over to you, Sylvia.
Okay, so thank you, first of all, for inviting me. So I always been envious of people who knew what they wanted to do in life, because I never had that. I never had a plan. And, you know, like how I ended up here has been a mix of small choices, one after the other, and lots of chance. So going back to my childhood, I have never dissected an insect. I never wanted to touch an insect. And I wanted to be an Olympic champion. So you would find in me spending lots of time in the gym. And there was no scientist in my family. And being a scientist never crossed my mind. And in fact, probably I didn't even know that you could be a scientist as a professional. So, you know, like what happened was injuries came along, so the Olympic dream was over. And, you know, I was quite good at school, and probably what sport gave me, which I carry with me, is discipline and resilience. So I think that's what probably came with me all the way. And, you know, like I prefer science than humanities, so it was quite natural for me to go into a school that would prepare me to go to university in some scientific subjects. But when it was time to choose what to do at university, again, I had absolutely no idea. It could have been anything. So the decision, and this is, you know, completely true, came up thinking, what was the single most exciting thing I have ever studied in the past years? And first thing came up to my mind was mental peace and human genetics. So, you know, I decided, well, that's going to be it. I went into biology, and, you know, at the end I did my internship in human genetics, so I kept the enthusiasm about genetics throughout, but I didn't want to be a scientist. And, you know, like I had, you know, like awful time in the lab. You know, being a student in Italy at that time was not fun. And, you know, like I would say the single defining moment was the opportunity to go on an Erasmus project. So here, you know, comes Brexit again, and it's given me lots of pain because that, for me, that was it. So I did Erasmus in Denmark. It was microbiology lab, and that was a complete revelation because that's when I learned that science was fun, and was creative. So I felt I could be creative. And that was also quite important because my sister was the good one in the family. She could draw, she could color, and I grew up being told that I had no fantasy and no creativity. And I discovered that I could be creative with science. Plus, I met so many wonderful people coming from all over the world. And I said, well, that's what I like to do. I like to give it a try. Went back to Italy, got my degree. I knew I had to get out of Italy, so I was lucky enough to get a PhD in Oxford. And getting the PhD was what, for the first time, again, coming from Italy, made me feel I was a human being before being a female student. So for me, science meant equality. And I'd never been thinking about women in science or issue about women in science until later on. Probably, again, I was extremely lucky to have an exceptionally good postdoc advisor, which maybe we can talk about later. But it was not until the end of my postdoc, when it was time to think about what's coming next, how to set up my group, that I joined a very informal network of women in science, and that's when we start discussing issue. And lots of things that I never thought about, I started saying, oh, whoa, this is going to hit me. And it was a bit terrifying, but it was also kind of refreshing to have these informal conversations. So being part of this network has been extremely important, and that was the first time that I became aware of issues like, the leaking pipeline and gender bias and stereotypes.
Thank you very much. An awful lot in there, I think, and some similarities, but also some differences. But I mean, coming back to that point about people's background in science, what you've heard there is actually very different experience from Jocelyn, who knew very early on. I mean, I don't think I would have even known what radio astronomy was, let alone maybe wanting to study it, to Sylvia, who was saying, it was only quite late on, almost by serendipity, having not been able to do something else, that was what attracted her to it. Could we maybe just pick up a little bit more about role models? And I was interested, Jocelyn, your comment, you didn't have any, but both you and Anne spoke about the role of your parents and the importance of your parents. Who else was important to you as you were growing up as role models? And they don't necessarily need to be scientists, but who sort of encouraged you on your career?
Okay, so my brother features quite not because he was a role model, but so when I was quite young, this was I was 10 years old. My brother, who I said was 5 years older than me and never paid much attention to me, all of a sudden said, thanks, would you like to go to the cinema? And I was filled with fear, to be honest, because I didn't know what was, this was not normal that he would want to spend time with me. Anyway, I said yes, and he got money from our parents to take me to the cinema, and it was to see a film called Fantastic Voyage. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen this. It was 1966, and well, it was about a bunch of scientists who were miniaturized to microscopic level, and they were injected into the body of another scientist who had brain damage, and their job was to go and repair his brain. And one of the scientists who was injected in was Raquel Welch, which will explain to you why my brother wanted to take me to the cinema. Because, I was 10, he was 15. So, but that was, I wouldn't say that Raquel Welch was a role model, but her character in that film was the first time I'd ever been exposed to a woman. She had a technical role in what she was doing, so deeply involved in how to deliver a successful mission, and she was part of the team. And that things like that, it sounds small and insignificant, but I still remember it now. It was a long time ago, and you can still get the DVD, by the way, of Fantastic Voyage. But those sorts of things, and then I think when I was doing my PhD, I can remember being in the cloakroom in the department where I worked. It was in Cambridge, and two very famous women scientists came in when I was in a cubicle, and they started chatting to each other about going out, who they met, what they've been doing, and so on. So that's why I'm not mentioning their names. But so I was sitting in the cubicle listening to this, and embarrassingly, me as a young, aspiring female scientist, I was imagining that scientists, women scientists who were successful, somehow didn't have a life or any other interests outside their science. And that's shocking, because I was a woman trying to do that. And of course, I knew I had plenty of outside interests. But that was inspiring to me, obviously, because they had achieved great things in their own research and were at the very highest level. But that they spoke just like I spoke with my friends. They weren't different. And it was the first time I'd realised that they weren't different than me. And so if they could do it, I could do it. And so that's why role models for me are very important. And being visible is important. Just being visible and kind of owning your success and talking about it to other people. It's not an arrogance. It's a really fundamentally important thing to make people realise that, yeah, if she can do that, she looks pretty ordinary to me, I can do it as well. So that was a kind of role model thing for me.
Thanks, and that comes back, I think, to some of the aims of the exhibition we've got out there, is understanding that these people in the exhibition have all got very different backgrounds. But one of the women who are in the exhibition, they're not here tonight, said to me, I don't want to be portrayed as a superwoman. There are other things I do, there are other things, as a mother, as a carer, there are other things I'm engaged in beyond science, and that's what we hope comes across as well. These are people that, like Anne was talking about, who have varied and diverse lives, but have a key role in science. Jocelyn, you said that you didn't have role models, but earlier you talked about your parents and having a very good physics teacher that had quite an influence. Were there other people, as you went through your career later on, that you sort of held up as role models? As I say, they don't necessarily need to have been from science.
I don't really think there were. I'm sorry to sound rather negative, but throughout my career, I've either been the only woman in a place or the most senior woman in a place. And actually, one of the best forms of support I had was here in Edinburgh when I was working at the Royal Observatory as the most senior woman, but not the only woman. And there was at that stage in Edinburgh a women in management group. So there was the head personnel officer from the local M&S and all sorts of people like that. And I discovered that the issues they faced were not so different from the issues I faced, albeit I was in a management role at the observatory at that stage. But it's been pretty lonely, and I've had to be pretty stubborn, and I think probably so persistently stubborn that I'm still stubborn. It's kind of become ingrained. I think one thing that is actually quite a help is all my life I've been a member of the Quakers, the Religious Society of Friends, and that is a body that has educated its women and used its women. Much more than any other church that I've come across, I must say. And I think that's given me a courage that I might not otherwise have had. Or maybe it's just made me bloody stubborn.
Thank you. Sylvia?
Again, I don't think it's ever been the famous scientist. It's always been the people around me. And I think the support that we would give each other, like maybe other PhD student and other postdoc. And I think it's that kind of network that when you see that you share same problem, same anxiety, that gives you courage. And I think, I have to say that my role model, the person I like to be, is actually a man. And as I mentioned earlier, it was my postdoc PI, the boss of the lab. And in fact, I don't hide that this morning I was totally terrified, and he was the person I brought to. And I knew that within 5 minutes I would get a reply. Because, I saw people in leadership that maybe, medias are not nice, but like, there was a person, well, let's say the name is Tony Monaco. So being in leadership, being nice to everybody, always there to answer. And that's what I aspire to be. I aspire to be nice. And not only was doing that, but he was taking care of his children. So maybe we would have the love meet, and he would come in and say, oh, I can't understand why the other moms are not talking to me when I drop the children at school, because he was the only man doing that. And, like these kind of things. So that tells us that it's not just seeing women in science being successful, but if we are decent people, that's what we need to inspire and create a better environment for whoever works with us.
And that's certainly something that came out of the Tapping All Our Talents review, actually, the importance of making a fairer workplace for everyone, and actually the benefits that would flow from that for men as well as women. It wasn't just about addressing issues for women. We have got a second question for you, which is about who your role models are. And again, we'll just take a couple of minutes to get the answers up on the screen, or your female role models. Leslie Yellowlees, are you putting your own name in repeatedly?
Thank you.
Nicola Sturgeon, yes. Beyonce, great. Madonna. Michelle Obama, that's a good one.
I'm going to keep this going till Leslie appears in the middle again. Fantastic. I mean, what's nice about that is, again, actually, there's a whole range of people there. I just saw Frida Kahlo as well. So some people are about family, and I bet it's about my mum. Some of it is about famous women in other aspects of life. Some of it is about scientists. Some of it is about people you might call populists in terms of Beyonce and people like that. So there is no right role model or somebody who should be a role model. The role model is wherever you find them. I should just say, in response to Jocelyn saying that she didn't particularly have a role model, I think probably what we can all agree on is how much of a role model she has been to a huge number of people and continues to be as well. So I think you've flipped the balance on that. One of the things you all spoke about, although you might have expressed it in different ways, was the enjoyment about collaboration and actually meeting different people and working with different people. And Jocelyn, maybe I could ask you first of all, actually, what most positive experience of collaboration have you had? And it, again, doesn't need to be just with women, but what have you most enjoyed working on with different people?
I had to work in a lot of different branches of astronomy because I married a man who had to move to jobs in different parts of the country. And so I've flipped around through many branches of astronomy. And during some of the most exciting times when the discoveries were kind of rolling in fast, tremendous collegiality in the lab. The data came first over my desk and I say, there's something new here, and people would rally round to help and so on. So there was a phenomenal spirit, albeit that was an exceptionally exciting time for that particular lab and that particular subject. But there are great people in the field. And it's been huge fun working in so many different areas of it. Yeah.
And Anne, I know you've often spoken about actually how great it is in terms of the people you meet, but I was reading one interview from you the other day where you were saying the great thing about science is that there's so many people out there to help you. Maybe drawing on your experiences when you're working for the Commission or government, how did you benefit from that collaboration?
Well, I think so. It's a very particular role if you're a chief scientific advisor, because obviously you have a specialism in your own area of science, but you're being called upon to offer advice on lots of different areas. And it was quite overwhelming when I was appointed chief scientific advisor for Scotland. I knew I couldn't sit down with all the science books in the world and become an expert. So what do? You have to rely on people who are knowledgeable in those areas. And it was really quite overwhelming, although you already know it in a way in your own discipline, that people are very eager to help because they find it exciting to help. I also find it exciting to help other people, and it's wonderful to be asked. But I think so I remember I was chief scientific advisor when the Icelandic volcano that I think I can still pronounce, Eyjafjallajökull, erupted. And we closed down our airspace. And the then First Minister in Scotland, who was Alex Salmond, was, I suppose he was puzzled by this, because he was saying, look, volcanoes erupt all the time. Why are we closing our airspace because of this one? And I didn't know the answer to that. But within a very short period of time, so kind of 10 or 15 minutes, I was able to, actually I phoned the British Geological Survey in Edinburgh, where they have volcanologists there, who would understand it, who told me basically that the dust from this particular volcano was had a lot of silica, like very glassy dust, and that if it entered a jet engine, and jet engines on modern aircraft, they operate above their melting temperature, and that they can do that because they've got very fine capillaries, so that when they're going through the air, there's air cooling, and it's an efficient way to burn the kerosene fuel. And so basically, if we were flying airplanes through that glassy dust, what I explained to the First Minister was that it would go in, melt, and block off the capillaries, and the temperature of the engine would increase, and they would melt and fall off. And that's why we had... but, I mean, I didn't know that, but the volcanologists who I spoke to explained it to me, and if I didn't quite get it and said, no, I'm still not understanding, they explained it again and again until I did get it, and it didn't matter that it was late at night, it didn't matter that it was at the weekend. They wanted their knowledge to be useful, and they offered it and said at any time, people gave me their mobiles, they said, don't worry about when you call. So that's a really good example of people just wanting the knowledge that they're lucky enough in a way to own or to share in with their colleagues, and they want it to be helpful, and so they will help you. And that's, I think for me, and I think it's probably true for all of us, that is a life in science. It's not mean there isn't competition. There's a healthy competition out there which often accelerates discovery, but that people genuinely want to solve the problem with you, or have a bit of the jigsaw that they're prepared to hand over in order that you get the final picture. So,
yeah, so that I completely agree. I think is one of the aspects I just love about the job is meeting people and really the diversity, because we spend lots of time on a project together, we get to know each other, and you discover lots of things beyond the science, and you really create bonds with people. And now it's also fantastic when you travel around the world, you have friends everywhere. And I think that's just unbeatable. But so there are two different levels of collaboration. Is your close team, the people that maybe you see every day, that you really share a goal together and you want to get there. And for us, the most exciting thing is when, we get a band on a gel and we see, that's the one. So I think that feeling is just unbeatable. And to be able to share the feeling with somebody that understand, that's, what brings joy. But we also now, our field, human genetics, means we can't do anything within our own team. We have to work with international collaborations. And that means that we have to share data. So there are no data that belongs to you, but, we generate the data and put it together. And I think that's just fantastic, because we are all accelerating science by working together. So maybe you have to spend hours and hours on conference call with, 50 people on the phone, and, losing track of who is saying what, and maybe, yes, I agree with you. But, I think that's just phenomenal what we can do by working together. Which means, lots of other problems that we are creating for ourselves just make it even harder for us scientists to accept some of the political decisions that are going on.
We'll sidestep that and keep positive. But I mean, the idea of 50 people on a teleconference that strikes me as terrifying, but there we go. But one of the things that certainly that a lot of the women say who are featured in the exhibition is actually about the collaboration with different disciplines. And if I might just have a bit of a plug for RSE here, one of the things that differentiates us as a national academy from some of the other national academies is our fellowship includes people from right across the academic disciplines, so the physical scientists, but also the social scientists, arts and humanities, but also reaches into people from the business, the public sector, the third sector, so leaders across all these different fields. And when we're trying to address real world challenges, that's what they often need. Actually, we're not going to solve it. The challenges don't fall into disciplinary boxes, which this is a biological problem or a chemical problem or a physical problem. It's actually often a combination of issues. So having that diversity of expertise and experience, I think, serves us well in all our work. Maybe I could touch on another issue that all of you mentioned, although you might have again described it in slightly different ways, but the one of resilience. And you all spoke about that, and I think, Sylvia, you also spoke about discipline. And I know, Jocelyn, some of your interviews, it really comes across that absolute, I think you just used the word stubborn, but, just knuckling down and getting on with it, almost whatever challenges were faced. Anne, for you, where did the resilience come in?
It's hard to know, isn't it? But I think when you've got a lot of support, like family support, and then when I got married and I had a very supportive husband, that always mattered because you felt that you had people who just believed in you and what you were trying to do, so that when you were faced with, and actually all of us, it's not just scientists, but when we're faced with something in life that doesn't seem fair, and of course it seems ridiculously unfair that you wouldn't choose the best person for the job or support people who are talented just because they're women, there's a terrible unfairness about that. And I've always had a thing in my life about I will do anything to try and counter unfairness, and it doesn't matter whether it's in science or it's in public life or whatever it is. I really don't like that, and so I will, I almost fight harder if the unfairness isn't focused at me. If it's focused at someone else, that really, really annoys me. And I think there's a resilience that comes out of that, and also understanding that if you do stand up for things, and it might be uncomfortable, you're better at the end of it. You learn a lot from it, and it also it kind of flushes people out of the woodwork that you never knew would be your supporters or contributors or helpers. And so, and that in turn makes you more resilient, because you know that the next time that I come up against something and it's going to be difficult, that I have some kind of resolve to do it, but I won't be on my own, which comes back to the previous point. But I think, there has to be something. I think I've often been described as stubborn, and maybe, obviously it doesn't sound that nice, does it? Kind of stubborn. Resilient sounds better. So I think we just hear stubborn means resilience. I think, and there is, and we have to be careful of language, because that's what many women will have come up against, is that there is often language, adjectives associated with women. I've been on the Radio 4 Today programme where unfortunately I was on a pre-record, but the guest in the studio called what I'd said hysterical. You've got to be really careful about that, because I certainly wasn't being hysterical, but it was to try and undermine as well what she said was just emotional and she's probably a wee bit crazy sort of thing, and that's diminishing. So we have to be very resilient against that, but call it out when it happens. You don't have to be aggressive about it, and I wouldn't be, but I think I would say that just sounds like vaguely sexist language. Did you mean that? Is helpful to do.
Yeah, well, I wonder if what you're calling stubborn, if it was about a man, would be called actually determined or focused or resolute. Anne and I were both at an event the other day about women in business, and one of the things somebody was saying there was about actually how early this language gets entrenched. So young girls being forthright in a playground, being called bossy, while young boys are being described as natural leaders. And that's a simplistic way of looking at things. But language is important, and the words we use are important. So I think absolutely right to pick them up. Sylvia, you talked about the importance of sport in giving you the sort of discipline and resolve, but where do you think resilience has been particularly important to you in your career so far?
Okay, so, when you gave my introduction, you pointed out I have Royal Society Fellowship. What you didn't point out is how many fellowship I failed to get. So,
Not to do that with guests.
But I think it's important to celebrate failure, because what I'm proud is not that I got the fellowship, but that I didn't give up. And, that was my 8th attempt. And in the end, I got it. And, the reason I'm in Scotland, I wrote my application to stay in Oxford because, that's where I was, best place to do science. But at that time, I said, maybe I need to think of a B plan. So I started applying for jobs. And, what happened was that I got both the jobs and the fellowship in the end. But I think really is, I say, okay, this didn't went well. How can I do better? You bounce back. And, that's something that doesn't go away. You keep failing. For any grant you get, there are maybe 10 you don't get. So without that resilience, you can't keep going. And, sometimes it's hard, but I'm not the only one. So I'm not ashamed of my failures. But I'm actually quite proud that I managed to keep going in spite of. And, maybe it was, maybe hours and hours in the gym when you try the thing and you never get it right. And, you have your coach shouting and punishing you. And, you're not going to go away until you get it right. And you do get it right in the end. Some people get it right before you. Good for them, but we can get there in the end.
And it's a really important message that sometimes we look at people who are successful and think it's been easy and think they've just got there and actually not understand the failures or challenges they've had along the way that have actually made it quite a difficult journey. Jocelyn, for you, resilience?
I was lucky in that I knew as a schoolgirl what I really wanted to do. And that's a huge help. I don't know that... I think I was probably the only one in my class that knew what she wanted to do. And as some of the class observed, and she did it. So that was an enormous benefit. I had to flex it as I got married and had a child and moved with my husband. But having that kind of focus, sense of direction, I think is quite important. I don't think you can be resilient unless you know where you're going. So I think you need to know, first of all, what you're trying to do and then be resilient to try and get there.
Thank you. I'm going to take us on now to maybe sort of think about some of the challenges and barriers about being a woman in science. And actually, I am going to come to you first, Jocelyn, because I know you've had a huge amount of challenges to cope with being a woman in science, sort of, particularly in the 60s and 70s. And one of the things I remember most clearly when you were president of RSE is a talk that you gave about your experiences in Cambridge at the time of the discovery of the pulsars. And when some of your male colleagues were being asked about the science, you were being asked about whether you described yourself as a blonde or a brunette or whether you had a boyfriend, and being asked to undo the top button of your shirt. More, okay. But, and we can maybe talk about how things might have changed and how explicitly or implicitly some of that sexism and discrimination still goes on. But, what were the key challenges for you in the earlier part of your career when you were, having these phenomenal discoveries but working in a very male environment? And how do you address those?
I was a graduate student at the time, and actually as a graduate student you can't do a lot of addressing because you are too vulnerable, particularly when it's your PhD supervisor that you maybe need to address, amongst others. If you're in a vulnerable position, you just often have to grin and bear it. But gradually you get more senior, or at least freer. And one of the things I've always tried to do is try and ensure that it's a bit easier for those that come behind me. Not just the females, but also the male students. Because grad students are surprisingly vulnerable. to be honest.
I mean, this is a hypothetical question, so I recognise that as I ask it. But if you had been a male graduate student, do you think you'd have had the same experience? I mean, you might not have been asked to unbutton your shirt at that time, but do you think you'd had the same experience?
I was a female student with an engagement ring, and that, I didn't realise it, or at least I didn't realise the extent of it, but that sent out a message that I was quitting. And a male graduate student can get married and is presumed to continue working. At that particular time in Britain, married women didn't work. It was considered shameful if a married woman had to work. It meant he wasn't earning enough money to keep you both. So I only worked this out afterwards, but I recognised that my advisor's attitude towards me changed when I started wearing that engagement ring. So that's...
And when you were doing your career, I don't think there was the same sort of view in terms of married women working. But what would you say have been the key challenges you've experienced as a woman working in science?
It's quite interesting listening to you, Jocelyn, because you worked in a different area of science. And I think even now, if you look at... Physics that's right. Physics versus biology. Well, the Tapping All Our Talents report very clearly showed that if you, there's a worrying aspect to this, but if you look at young people going to university, more women than men will go to university to study, we'll just put it under the umbrella of biology, than physics. That's always been the case, and it's got even more so. So women will go and study biology. And I think at some point, and Leslie might correct me in the audience, but it was, I think 68% is the number that I had as entry-level women going to study biology at university. But if you look at the number of female professors, so who end up there, it's about 12%. Now, that really is very worrying. So why is that? And actually, I would come back to the same thing. It's people's expectations of you. And people expect that if you're a woman, that you will get married and you'll have family, and that is inconsistent with you still being able to contribute to the work environment. And I know this is not science, but I was struck by something I saw on Twitter yesterday, and it was somebody saying that they had asked in the law firm in which they worked why it was that there were no female partners in the law firm. And the partner to whom she was speaking said, well, what you have to realize is being a partner is incompatible with having a family. And she then noticed the picture of his family on the desk. And he probably hadn't thought about it, but what he meant was that he thought his role within a family was different than her role would be. Now, I think that is changing because I see a lot of families now, and even in my own family, so my own parents, although my mother did stay at home and looked after my brother and I, and my father worked, at the weekend there was role reversal. She had a lie-in, he took us swimming, he cooked the meals and so on, and she did other things that she was interested in. So he understood that she did a job too, and that she needed some time off, that wasn't her life, the extent of her life. So I'm not being very helpful about the challenges, but let me just say something. There is something that I've been reflecting on, and not many of you here will know me or will have known me when I was much younger, a PhD student, a postdoc, and so on. But at that time, I was catastrophically shy. So I couldn't speak in public like this or whatever. And if you're a shy person and everybody thinks that's a negative thing, there's actually a really big positive thing, because that's you just get down and do your own thing, and you try not to notice what's going on around you, and you just have a goal and you keep going for it. So I think in my case, I simply did not notice a lot of the stuff going on around me, which would have been quite disheartening. It was only when I became less shy that I started noticing what was happening. But then I think then I had the resilience. I was a little bit more senior, less vulnerable, as you talked about, even although I still think in biology it was a lot less aggressive than I know the environment that you suffered. Because my PhD supervisor, he never said anything to me about being any different than any of the other students. I was a woman, a lot of them were men, not all of them. But he never made a big deal out of it, so I didn't even notice that. I knew we were men and women, of course, but nothing more than that.
And Sylvia, you said that you've actually had a very supportive environment and working environment. But have you observed elsewhere, or when you've been exposed to some of these debates on women in science and STEM things that you think, oh, I'm really surprised at that, and that's not happening in my area?
Well, I observe and I experience. So I can tell you things happen every day. And we all share the same experience. So, just imagine typical situation. We are conference call with 50 people, or in a committee meeting, and first of all, very often what happens, you have Professor Mark, Professor John, Professor Adam, and Sylvia, or that's a typical thing. We get used to that, but we have to say, remember. That's something that happens every day. But, what is something that actually has some consequences is that, you're big meeting or lots of people talking, and you think you can give a contribution to the discussion and say something clever, something positive, something constructive. So you win your shyness and, say, got to say something, you say it, silence. Move on. Then after 5 minutes, there is Professor John who repeats exactly the same thing. And everybody goes, oh, excellent. Let's take forward John's idea. So and then, the first person who talks said, why should I talk? Next time I'm just not going to say anything. So there are these dynamics that happen all the time. So, there is lots of focus on training women and being more assertive. But I think, I would love to see the day when we train chairperson to recognize these sorts of behavior and call them out. I think that's going to be a major breakthrough.
And I've certainly heard you, Anne, say something very similar about actually when a woman says something, it's not listened to always in the same way that a man says the same thing. I mean, I think that sort of gives us some maybe insights into how some of the nature of the challenges have changed over time. Maybe we see less of the undo your top button, although I think one of the things of the Me Too movement has shown there is actually also some very explicit sexism and discrimination going on, but actually they're more nuanced discrimination and sexism. And I know I sometimes read documents here and actually things where the men are named by their surname and their title, and the women are named by their first name. And so I think it's something that's a bit ingrained in the culture that we need to address and tackle. I'm conscious of time, so just thinking about the changes to the working environment, and again, this is going to be your last question for the audience as well in terms of Mentimeter, but I'm going to ask it of the panel first. If you could wave a magic wand, what would be the one sort of, the key change you'd like to see in terms of better supporting women in science? Sylvia?
So the simple answer is that I don't know. And I think it's because it's such a complex problem and we still don't know what is not working. And I think for me, what I like to do is to get more data, more understand it better, and then maybe we know what to do. So I've been thinking a bit about it, and I think so far we've been focusing a lot of who is successful, who are the women that make it. But maybe we need more data to understand what's going on to women that maybe are left behind, and we never look at that. So maybe by getting more data and understanding and asking questions where, people get out of the system, maybe that's what gonna help us, and maybe then I will have an answer.
Thank you.
This is not just for women in science, but I think the best thing that we could do is to change our societal attitude to parental leave. Because For lots of reasons, but I think that if we had a much greater expectation that men would take parental leave as well as women, that not only would it, and if I give you very briefly the Finnish example, so in Finland they decided 9 months of childcare leave on the birth of a baby, and women or men can take it. And what happened was that women took the 9 months and the men didn't take it. And they were asked why not, and they said, I wouldn't be taken seriously at work if I took time off to look after the kids. So the Finnish government then changed it to 3 months for the woman. If she doesn't take it, she loses it. 3 months for the man. If he doesn't take it, he loses it. And the other 3 months, you can choose who takes it. And overnight, men all took 3 months paternity leave, because they thought they would be thought of as foolish if they didn't take 3 months paternity leave. But here's the unexpected thing. When those men who'd had paternity leave went back to their work, they were on average more successful in achieving at their work than men who'd not had parental leave. And that's a fantastic outcome. But all the women who take maternity leave, they're exactly the same. They go back with additional soft skills, different ways of working, which are very valuable in the workforce. And I also think it would be supportive of men, it would be supportive of women, it would be supportive of the workplace, it would be supportive of society, and it would be supportive of those young children, because they would have the benefit of both the mother and the father's early care and commitment to them. And so I think our families would be different. So for me, it's a no-brainer. We all, as societies, that's what we should invest in. And then we start getting a bit of a level playing field, because we do need people to have families. So.
Thanks, Anne. Jocelyn?
Just to add to what Anne said, I say to women, if you can manage that one, you can manage your boss. I think the other thing we badly need is affordable childcare. It's exorbitant at the moment. So more of it and less expensive.
Great, thank you. And you've all had the opportunity to wave your magic wand, and you can see on the screen some of the things that are coming up. Enforced shared parental leave, which I think picks up Anne's point. Make men get pregnant is another way of looking at it. So I don't know how you're getting on with that, Sylvia, but maybe you could look into that. Important role of schools in terms of ensuring that girls know that they can become scientists, giving women more confidence and empowering women and supporting families. So a huge number of different things. We will collect these and take them away. I've just got a final question before we open up for questions from the floor, which is about, I think sometimes when we do things on women in science, I think there's a danger that it's seen as, oh, well, you're just doing something on women in science and a bit of a tick box, or a very specialist thing that hasn't got a wider resonance and relevance. And I know there's an awful lot of coverage, obviously, recently about the book by Caroline Criado Perez around sort of the data bias in the way that we do science, so that more women are injured and seriously injured in crashes, partly because most crash dummies, at least historically, have been based on the average male body. iPhones that are designed for a man's hand rather than a woman's hand. Heart attacks where actually the symptoms that men get are very different from ones that women get. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about, just to finish off before we open up, is why, from your perspective, does a diverse workforce make for better science? Anne, can I ask you that first of all?
Well, I've never researched into this area, but there is a lot of peer-reviewed, established research that looks at diverse groups and teams and how much more effective they are at delivering innovative solutions to things. So one, I would kind of have a look at the research, and if that's what it says, why would we be working in research or in any area of work with effectively one hand tied behind your back if you don't include women in your team? I would hope that we might, one day we'll have sorted the gender problem, but there'll still be other diversities that we have to look at. And it's just that we know that we are all different, and that difference is something to be celebrated, and it brings a different view to a research group or a team, a different way of problem solving, or approaching a problem. And that is how you get real innovation. So one of the things that I like doing as a scientist is speaking to other creative people, because remember, science is one of the most creative things you could do with your life, but looking at other creative people and how they communicate. So artists, musicians, how do they communicate? And can we borrow some of the means of communication, for example? And that's what comes from diversity. But the very basic diversity is kind of male-female. We have a different life experience. We approach problem solving not always differently, but sometimes. So let's capture it and use it, and it will be for everybody's advantage.
Sylvia?
Well, I don't have much to add. I completely agree. And I think it's also because when we do our work, there are two things. First of all, we do address societal challenges. So it's unthinkable that we would address big problems just from one perspective. And second, when we look at the answer, we always, when we do our work, we unconsciously apply our own experiences, our own point of view. So if we just go from one angle, we're never gonna get it all. So it's important that we bring, even if we're not aware of this contribution, diversity will look at the problem from different angles.
Thank you. Jocelyn, anything you want to add?
Some years ago, I spoke at a meeting organised by McKinsey's, the management consultants. And since then, I've been receiving the McKinsey Quarterly. And I don't read all of it, but, I read quite a bit of it. And it's very well established in the business world that the most robust, the most flexible, and the most successful is the diverse group. And I think that must apply in science as well.
Great, thank you very much. We've now got some time for your questions, about 15 minutes or so. Can I just ask people who've got questions to put their hands up, and then I'll have a sense of how unmanageable the next 15 minutes are going to be. Okay. Right, we'll take them individually then at the start, and if we need to group them later on, we will do. At the back, the woman with the blue.
Hi.
Is that on?
Hello. Oh, yes. So earlier on you said that you think that sexism might have become a little bit more nuanced in science. And I think that might be the case, but also I see a lot of very non-nuanced sexism. And I think especially on online platforms and social media, it's a great place for people to be very sexist towards female scientists. And just the coverage of Katie Bowman, who took the photo of the black hole recently, is a really good example. And people saying things like, how many people did she have to sleep with to be able to get this media coverage and things like that. So I was wondering if the panelists can give some advice on how we should behave as young female scientists when we're facing really explicit examples of sexism in science.
Thank you. Really important question and addressing a really important issue in terms of social media. Anne, you have a very active Twitter account. Do you want to take that first?
Do you know, I don't know how to answer your question, but I'll say something that is maybe a bit counterintuitive. Although social media can be a very positive thing, and that's how I've always approached it, but I am often shocked by what I see in social media. But there's a huge learning exercise there, because people are, I'm not anonymous in social media because I have my name attached to it and people know who I am. But a lot of people, and a lot of the very overt sexism and quite unpleasant sexism, comes from an anonymous Twitter address. And that person, if you met them, probably wouldn't be overtly sexist to you. So why I think it is useful, because it does uncover an undercurrent which you might not be aware of in normal life. And so if I had to give advice to people, and it's advice that I didn't take myself when I was younger, is pay attention. So do notice what's happening. And I think my own response to where I see sexism, where there's something that's overt or something even that there's an overtone, is that I'll always mention it, but in a way that I always give the person who has been sexist the benefit of the doubt that I'm sure they didn't mean that. And so, of course, they quite often did mean it. But I think in the same way, and I recognise completely what Sylvia said about saying something, radio silence, and then somebody, a man says it, and that's warmly regarded as being terrific. So when that happens to me now, I say, I'm glad you all like that, because did you not hear me? But I did mention that 10 minutes ago. So that's really positive enforcement that John has given to me there. So, and you have to, so I've got a lot of stock phrases of how you deal with that. The really unpleasant stuff, I have no idea. I find it shocking. And I just think those people are dangerous and seriously weird, but I don't know how you deal with them. I hope my colleagues do.
Sylvia, have you got an answer for that?
So I think, in a way, is look for the helpers, because there is lots of abuse, but there are lots of people that would ally. So they're there, and and be a helper yourself. So that's what I notice. For the amount of the abuse, there is always the good part that comes out. And
there was actually quite a nice exchange on the Royal Society's Twitter account a couple of weeks ago, where somebody had signed up to the account and then said, "Oh, there's just too much about women in science." But what was nice was actually the barrage of stuff that came from other people, So actually, what he'd actually done was attract all this reinforcement of women in science, rather than probably what he was trying to do. But Jocelyn, anything you want to add?
I don't think there's anything I want to add to that.
Okay,
no.
thank you. We've got a couple of questions down at the front. Can you put your hands up again? Just here in the third row, Katrina.
Thanks. I'm actually a physician, so I'm going to take the M in STEM to be medicine as well as maths, if that's okay, and I think we've got a lot of common ground. You all touched on networks. I'm in a male-dominated specialty, and when I raise the issue of networks, I get a range of opinions, particularly if I'm talking about a network for women. A lot of fearfulness from women about being identified as being other or peculiar because they want to have these relationships or this networking with other women. So I wondered if you could describe whether your networks are formal or informal, what the benefit perhaps of a formal network might be and your experiences of that.
Sylvia, do you want to take that first?
So as like I said at the beginning, I was so lucky to be part of a very informal network, because I think that gave us the freedom to discuss of lots of issues that really range from how we're going to solve the problem to issue like you would hear very well-established professors say, "Oh, how do you get your heart stop pumping when you ask a question at the end of a seminar?" And you can relate to that. So I think for me it was really that informality that prepared the ground for these sorts of small chatting or discussion at a different level. The problem is not everybody are so lucky to be part of an informal network. So in a way, we can create some of this network, but again, social media can come to help, because there are lots and lots of good platform where to create these exchanges and get some solidarity or discuss with others with similar situations.
You were talking the other day about the networking that goes on in bars after conferences, and actually how you create alternative networks. I wonder what you've got to add on this.
So I've taken advantage of more informal networks. I have been involved in lots of women at work networks. So in the building, the research building where I worked, or the faculty, we would have networks for women. And I will be honest with you, I didn't always find them that helpful, because sometimes life is so difficult for women at work. They come along and say, "Oh, this happened and this happened." And there was a lot of reinforcement, but of negative things that had happened. And I admire some networks that I've seen. For example, there's a network. It started in Brussels, and I'm not sure how wide it is. It's called Leaderize, and it's about women being leaders, and it's younger women. So I wasn't allowed to join the network because age discrimination, but that was good because younger women have a different experience than I have experienced. And so I think what they were reluctant to have is older women like me coming along and saying, well, what you have to realise is, and this is what to do, is actually they had a different view of life and what they wanted to achieve. And they were very positive and supportive. So I think we're all different. Networks work for some people, not others. What has worked for me are mentors. And most of the most useful mentors in my life, or really all of them, have been men who've told me what's going on in the workplace because I haven't necessarily been able to figure it out. And they've been very positively supportive and just have given me lots of interesting ways or alternative ways of approaching things that I might not have thought about myself. And probably the diversity, again, because they were men, they had slightly different kind of plans of attack for things or solutions to problems or approaching problems. And I find it great because it, allows me to do those things as well.
And Jocelyn, for you, formal versus informal, or formal and informal networks?
I think the most interesting and valuable network group I was involved in was a group of senior women scientists who were concerned about how to make life better for women in science. We met in a borrowed room in London after work, at our own expense and all that sort of stuff. And we thrashed around quite a while trying to work out what might be useful. And then one of us, who's a bit of a psychologist, said, vice-chancellors are competitive guys. And they were all guys at that stage. He said, if we invent a prize for the most women-friendly university, they'll compete. We were extremely poor. The only thing we could afford was a glass rose bowl. But we announced this competition for the most women-friendly university, and they competed. And that was the origin of Athena Swan.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. And there was a question just behind. If you just pass it back, actually, just thank you.
I think that's interesting to pick up on that, actually, Jocelyn, because my point was originally about something you said, Sylvia, about training chairs rather than the women in a meeting having to show that resilience that you've just mentioned of saying, excuse me, that was my idea. But actually, I work in a role where I'm trying to train people within universities, and the trouble is a lot of the chair-type people don't want to be trained because the system works for them. So, Jocelyn, you've just mentioned something that actually has tried to change the system. Who has the power to change the system? I'm flanked by two young women who want to be scientists, and what makes me really nervous is that on top of having to work hard to be a scientist, they're also going to have to work really hard to survive all these things. Why don't we just change the system, and how do we do that?
So an easy question, Jocelyn.
The funding bodies hold the power. The Athena Swan took off when Dame Sally Davis, Chief Medical Officer for England and Wales, was meeting with the heads of medical schools down south. Kind of discussion, heads of schools have with the funders. And at the end of the meeting, she said, "You're all men, where are the women?" And the men said, "Oh." And she said, as she had a rush of blood to the head, and said, "If you want my funding, you've got to hold Athena Swan bronze by the end of next year." Whoosh.
That's a really good example and one I would have used, but I think you need to understand the system. And I completely support your view that you have to change the system, because I know that a lot of people have said to me, not so much recently, but previously, that women need to change to fit into the workplace. And that's absolutely not the case. If you get women to change, you've lost all the advantage of the women. You need to change the workplace so that it is a good place to work for women and for men. And if you do that, and my experience tells me that every time you do that and you change the workplace, you've automatically made it better for men. So this is the wonderful thing that we always try and achieve in life, a win-win situation where nobody loses out. But I think the theme of what you're saying, Jocelyn, is that we're in many ways, humans are actually very simple. an incentive works for us. And whether it's a competition or some money or whatever, there's always some carrot. It differs in different environments that you can dangle in front of people. And we need to be imaginative in just inventing lots of carrots to make sure that the system changes.
Sylvia, you mentioned about your colleague who was a man and about actually his role in childcare. And actually, can I just say thank you to the men who are in the audience here, not in a patronising way, but if we are going to change the system, it does need not just women to be doing things, but men to be doing things as well. So thank you for the support that you're showing. But Sylvia, from your perspective, how do we change the system?
Okay, so I'm going to mention another man who I don't know, but I happened to watch something very interesting this morning on TV. So I think it was BBC Breakfast. So it was CEO of Reddington. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this correct. So I was invited to talk because his company in a year completely reduced the gender pay gap. So they went from 20% to 0.2%. And they asked him, how did you do that? And it turned out, well, whether it's true or not, I don't know. But what he was saying is that it was really a change in culture and leadership. So it was really his own mission, which goes back to leading by example. And he wanted to recreate a situation where people would feel comfortable to call out bad behavior. He changed completely the promotion criteria, retention criteria, making it easier for people that wanted to go back to work. So I think when we see this positive model, things can get changed, but we need to get strong leadership.
Thank you very much. And I was just reminding myself of the Tapping on Our Talents report. If you haven't read it, I can give it a plug. But we identified a number of areas that we thought needed addressed, one of which was leadership, another of which was behaviours, third of which was about data, and the final one was about education and training. I'm not pretending to say that the report has all the answers, but hopefully some ideas about how we can collectively change the system. I'm afraid that's it. We've run out of time, but thank you for all your contributions, including your participation in Mentimeter. It's been great to have a full house for tonight. Can I also, though, of course, thank our panellists, Dr. Silvia Paracchini, Dame Professor Jocelyn Burnell, and Dame Professor Anne Glover. Thank you. And thank you, of course, to all of you for coming. If you do have time on the way out to look at the exhibition, please do. But as I say, the building will be open during the working week and during working hours, so do feel free to pop in, tell your friends, bring your friends, and let's celebrate women in science.